thanks very much for joining us on our CNBC TV 18 special coverage, The Road to the Goods and Services Tax. We've been right on top of this story for several weeks now, and in a couple of minutes from now, the suspense will be over. The Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramanian's panel, has submitted its recommendations to the Finance Minister. The terms of reference for the CA panel was to arrive at a revenue-neutral rate for the Goods and Services Tax. As we've been reporting here on CNBC TV 18, we're given to understand that the rate could be 18% or perhaps even lower. But to take us through the proceedings this evening, we've got a panel of our experts joining us on CNBC TV 18. With us this evening is Sachin Menon, Head of Indirect Tax at KPMG. Also with us, MS Money, Senior Director at Deloitte India. Amit Kumar Sarkar, Partner, Grant Thornton India. And we'll be joined by many more of our experts right here on CNBC TV 18. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on our special coverage as we wait by for the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramanian, to brief us. But let me start very quickly by getting a quick comment from each and every one of you. And Money, let me start by asking you, 18%, or do you expect a rate even lower than that?
Based on what we have been hearing till now, I think an 18% will be excellent. And if it's lower than 18, it will be some kind of a dream come true. But if it's 18, and if we hear a rate of 18%, I think most of us should be very, very happy about it.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see if there is a positive surprise coming our way. That's what we are being told. But Amit, let me get in a quick word from you as well. What else would you be expecting beyond, of course, the headline revenue neutral rate? What else would you be waiting for to hear from the Chief Economic Advisor?
Well, I wonder if the Chief Economic Advisor will also be bringing in some clarity in terms of what could be the types of goods and, more importantly, services that could qualify for a lower rate of GST. There has been some talk that there would be a bunch of services of national importance which would be given a reduced rate of GST. That would be interesting to see. And the second part is there is some comment going around of a list of negative goods like tobacco, etc. And what would be the peak rate of GST that would be recommended for those kind of socially evil goods, as we may call it?
Yeah, we do understand that the sin goods may in fact attract a higher rate, and that is something that we could see more clarity on from the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramanian, in just a couple of minutes. Satish, your quick comments before we get into more details.
My expectation would be a rate lower than 18%, because with a larger credit base, which is likely in GST, I expect a much lower rate of tax. If I were to kind of compare, with the experiences of the global, for example, most of the countries, like Malaysia, etc., have been kind of between a 5 and a 10%. So I feel with a larger credit pool, a rate lower than 18% would be ideal from an Indian perspective.
A rate lower than 18%, and as I pointed out, several of our sources within the government have been telling us over the last few days, or in fact over the last few weeks, that we could see a positive surprise and we could even see a rate lower than 18%. This is a recommendation. This is only the first step, because this is now going to go to the empowered panel. We don't know yet when the government intends to table this in the Rajya Sabha at this point in time, and of course whether the Congress party is going to come on board or not. But Mani, we were having this conversation a few days ago when that Chai Pe Charcha took place, with the Prime Minister calling on Sonia Gandhi, the former Prime Minister, to thrash out the contentious issues. It looks like the government is going to yield ground on some of those crucial issues. Do you believe that we could perhaps see some give and take on the rate itself being enshrined into the Constitutional Amendment Bill? Some leaders of the Congress party say that that is non-negotiable, that has to indeed be the case. But do you think that logic may prevail?
I would just like to say that even today, in respect of the other taxes that we have in the country, none of them are enshrined in the Constitution. And the Constitution is for very different purposes. It's not for mentioning the tax rates. And consequently, possibly a middle path which could be worked out is to ensure that the rate of 18 or any rate that is agreed by all the stakeholders is put together and recommended to the GST Council. This again becomes very, very important, because on date, it is the sole prerogative of the GST Council to establish the rate of GST when GST begins in the country. Now, if there is a recommendation from the government in respect of what could be the rate which the GST Council could consider, I'm sure the GST Council, when it is set up, would look at it very, very favorably. And that might be a solution where both parties could have their say and they could have the rate of 18% and it need not be mentioned in the Constitution Amendment Bill.
Well, that's right. In fact, we have images of the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramanian, headed back into North Block. That is where he is going to be addressing the press conference. Of course, the report was submitted in Parliament and our colleague Rituparna Bhuyan was there tracking all the action. And of course, we'll get you more details of what transpired in Parliament. Of course, it's unlikely that the Finance Minister is going to be speaking today. That's what we're given to understand. It is going to be the Chief Economic Advisor. He will brief the press in a couple of minutes from now. And those are the shots of the Chief Economic Advisor submitting his report to the Finance Minister. But let's just go back to our conversation that we were having. Amit, as those pictures play out, for the benefit of our viewers, and we've been discussing this over the last several months here on CNBC TV 18, the possibility of April 1, 2016 being met. Yes, this panel's recommendations will now move to the empowered panel. The legislative calendar is a challenging one, as has been admitted by the government. It looks very, very difficult that we will be able to meet that April 1, 2016 timeline, even if the winter session of Parliament is met.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the way in which the legislative process needs to continue, we are all optimistic that with all of these elements of compromises, consensus, adjustments coming in, we are hopeful that the GST bill will go through the Rajya Sabha. Even if it does go through Rajya Sabha in this panel, you will still have to go through the state assemblies. Assuming that all the state assemblies are geared up and already forewarned by the centre to move it, it would still move into the budget session of many of the state assemblies. And after that will be when the act has to be passed both by the centre and by the states, which would mean logically it's going into the monsoon session to winter session of next year. So 1st of April 2016 is more or less dead on arrival. That date cannot be looked at all. 1st of October 2016 is something which is theoretically possible. However, I personally believe that date or that deadline may also get missed, and which is why, in all the interactions that we've had, we've always maintained that it should always be 1st of April 2017 as a realistic implementation date.
Absolutely. It seems that 1st of April 2017 is a realistic expectation at this point in time. But Mani, let's come back to what we could see the government give up some ground on. And that 1% entry tax, interstate tax, call it what you like, that's been controversial. The Congress party has been demanding that it be done away with. The government has also privately expressed concerns and inflationary concerns of bringing in that 1% tax. We now are given to understand that perhaps there could be a rethink and a review. If that's done away with, how significant is that likely to be?
Okay, let me just explain as to why the 1% does not seem to be a very bright idea according to me. Essentially, what we are talking of is that when GST comes into the picture, we are going to have a seamless movement of goods across the country. Now, a seamless movement of goods across the country cannot be achieved by having taxes which impede the movement, and this 1% tax is a tax which has not been discussed in the past. This is something which has come into the picture possibly very recently, maybe around 4 or 5 months back, when the Rajya Sabha Select Committee went around soliciting views of the various stakeholders on GST. Now, on an economic front, if there is no tax on the movement of people within the country or the movement of services between states, there should not be a tax which should be there in respect of movement of goods between those same states. So consequently, when we discuss 1%, we just need to bear in mind that the central sales tax has been in existence for close to 60 years now. And if the 1% additional tax continues, it would largely mean that the CST Act 1956 continues in a different form or maybe in a different avatar. As far as the timing of the tax is concerned, while the government said it will be for a period of 2 years, past experience indicates that once we have a tax which is initially intended for a period of 2 years or so, it tends to continue for a longer period of time. Consequently, if the 1% tax is dispensed with at this stage, I think the government would be doing a great service to trade and industry, because by removing this 1% tax, they would ensure that there is seamless movement of goods across states and there is no tax cascading, because this tax would not have resulted in a credit which would have become a cost to trade and industry as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that front, and we do understand that that is going to be one of the issues that the government may in fact do a rethink. But Amit, on one of the other contentious issues, and that is the independent dispute resolution mechanism, where again we're given to understand that the government may yield some ground and it may in fact be made a part of the bill. Your take on the Congress Party's demand, of course that is not going to be something that the CA panel is going to make suggestions on.
Well, there's always a lot of debate that goes around in whether we would need to have an independent dispute resolution authority. My personal 2 bits on it is, as a concept, there is nothing wrong in having an independent dispute resolution authority, simply because every small matter, every dispute, every angle of discontent between states or between a state and the center cannot always go all the way to the GST Council. Secondly, if there are disputes happening between states, one way of handling it is the 2 state governments sit together across the table, which is hoped to happen in the GST Council. But what happens if the 2 state governments agree to disagree? There should be an independent forum where they can then go as a grievance redressal measure. So there are merits in having an independent dispute resolution authority. On the other side, if you have an authority and you have a council, then the question is, how do you share powers between them? So it's a debatable topic. There are merits, there are demerits in the constitution of the dispute resolution authority. What will be their powers? How will they interface with the council? Who overrides whom, and so on and so forth. Those details are what, frankly, I'm waiting to hear. Because so far we've just had a headline item saying there should be a dispute resolution authority, but we do not know how they will interface with the council. Hopefully that might get
That's not the
clarified.
only headline item that we've had, Amit. In fact, most of it we've had to deal with are only headlines. The meat and the substance is yet to be sort of comprehensively, we haven't been taken through the details just yet, but most of the headlines are at least out in the public domain. And as I said, we've been reporting on those for several weeks now. But let's just get back to what we could see from the Chief Economic Advisor, and that's the 3 rates that we are expecting: the concessional rate, the standard rate, and a higher rate. And Satish, let me ask you in terms of your expectations as far as that tiered structure is concerned.
See, I feel the tier structure could be not more than 3 or 4, because anything which is beyond 4, I think, is going to be difficult for the government to administer. It's going to be difficult for the industry to kind of comply. And as long as it's 3 or 4, even the litigations will be lower in this country, because otherwise this can lead to classification disputes that we have had in terms of history in the country. The second thing is, in terms of rates between goods and services, I would still prefer 2 different set of rates between goods and services, only for the simple reason, services cannot take a rate of tax which is applicable to goods, which is applicable even today, because we are talking about the rate of tax on goods, which is a combination of excise plus VAT. And on services, it is about 14 plus, of course, the Swachh Bharat 14.5 now. So certainly, I would advocate a 2-tier structure between goods and services, which effectively means we are looking at a model which could be pretty similar to some of the models that we have seen in some of the countries. I'm not talking about the experience in a country like, say, Brazil, but looking at certain experiences from Europe and the Far East. I think a 2-rate structure, I think, looks pretty much decent. But at the same time, what we need clarity is in terms of what is going to be the rate for threshold dealers, for example, assuming the threshold limit is about 50 lakhs, and what is going to be the lower rate of tax for those kind of dealers. Is there going to be some specific rates for certain specific sectors? For example, let me take textile sector, because it's a common man involved ultimately in this, being clothing. It can be then the gems and jewelry sector. So we need to look at some of these sectoral problems also. So it's not only about simplification into a 3-basket structure, it's also looking at specific industries and then looking at revenue neutral rates specific to those sectors, and then make it happen in terms of a GST rollout.
Mani, what would your expectations be, just to take this, whether it's a 2-tier structure and the sectoral aspect that Sachin was just talking about forward?
I would just say that if we have a two-tier structure, while it could be good from the government perspective to have a two-tier structure, it would still lead to issues of classification at a trade and industry level. Now, if the two-tier structure is going to result in different rates being applied on products which are roughly similar, that could lead to more of disputes. But if the two-tier structure is made in a manner where the higher rate is made applicable only to those goods and services which are clearly meant for ostentatious consumption, tobacco for instance, in that case it would work very, very well. At this stage, one of the things that I would like to mention is alcoholic beverages are kept outside the purview of GST. So there's no question of a higher rate being applied to alcoholic beverages because they're expected to be remaining outside the ambit of the Constitution Amendment Bill itself.
That's a good point that you bring up there, Mani. Amit, your quick take as well, just to continue this argument forward.
Yeah, I agree with what Mani is saying. When you're looking at having a three-rate basket and taking off at what Satish was also mentioning, it is very important to ensure that the description of the goods and the services that will form part of the respective rate schedules is quite unambiguous. If you're having a discussion where, for example, if we take, say wheat flour, and you say wheat flour or atta is going to be at a lower rate of tax to start with, or maybe even exempted, but then a wheat flour or atta which is branded will end up getting into a GST rate, which will be lower or higher depending upon the brand. That kind of subjective classification is something which has caused a lot of pain in the past, in history. That is something that we would like to see the government avoid under GST, because the quantum of dispute around it, the quantum of legislation around it is just very painful for everybody concerned. We also have to see, and which is what I mentioned earlier as well, whether the government is considering having a bunch of services which are of national importance and giving them the same kind of treatment as goods. There, the question that comes about is whether the government is looking at taxing all services together in the standard rate, which will be 18% or lower, as we're expecting, or will the government break it up into two bunches of services? I personally would be very happy to see that kind of benefit being given.
What we're given to understand, Amit, is that essential services could be in the lower tax bracket,
which is very good. And if it is going to be the lower tax bracket, then actually there is one more reason to celebrate on top of the moderate rate of GST that is being recommended.
Yeah, we still need to get clarity there from, and there I can see the Chief Economic Advisor. He is now taking his seat and will start addressing the media, and the suspense will finally be over. It's been an agonizing wait for us, I have to say, but let's just now cut into what Arvind Subramanian, the Chief Economic Advisor, has had to say in his report, which he just a short while ago submitted to the Finance Minister. But just for the benefit of our viewers, this doesn't mean the GST is a done deal. There is a lot that it needs to go through before it can even be close to becoming a done deal. These are only recommendations. First, the government will have to accept them. Then it will go to the empowered panel. Then it will have to be a part of the GST bill, which will then be cleared by Parliament. So it's not a done deal by a long shot. But yes, it's certainly a move in the right direction. So let's